Alors, bonjour à tous, merci d'être venus. Merci à tous, Alexandra et Emmanuel, de m'avoir invité pour ce talk. Je suis particulièrement heureuse de revenir en France, but I will be speaking in English today, so please excuse me. I am now working for the Benesse Art Site Naoshima in Japan. Some of the island projects you may have heard about the name. However, I'm not talking about the Naoshima. Today, there is an exhibition of Tadao Ando at the Pompidou Center where there is a big installation in the center of the installation with big architectural models about the Naoshima project. So if you are interested in, please go to see that exhibition, and you will have the whole scope, well, at least part of the scope of the project, because the project itself is very, very big. It extends to the 3 different islands. There it only shows one Naoshima island, but there are also another 2 islands that we are working for. So I do hope that I will have another time to speak about it. Today I'm talking about a different topic, which is about Takashi Murakami. I think I have heard about, you all know Takashi Murakami as a name. But since it is the framework of art fair, and it is also about the collector, and unfortunately in Japan there aren't so many collectors as in France or in Europe or in the United States. However, there are some, and Takashi Murakami is one of these very unique collectors. One of the reasons he has, well, we actually organized this exhibition in Japan is to encourage more about this practice of collecting, because it is a part of whole the structure of which is supporting the art world. So now I get into the topic about this Takashi Murakami Superflat collection. So this is actually the exhibition I have created in 2016 at Yokohama Museum of Art. That was a very first exhibition of public showing of Takashi Murakami's collection. And well, as you know, he has many faces. He is, of course, an artist, but he is also a businessman, managing production company Kiki for the production of artworks, as well as films, goods, etc. He does also curate shows and write text. He's actually very, very good critics. And he has organized Geisai. Geisai is a kind of festival, a kind of open call project for a discovery of young talent. And he is also a gallerist. So he approaches to art from many different angles, including collecting. And collecting is rather new and lesser known activities of Takashi Murakami. So you see some of the images of production studio that he organized. It's a huge studio in the context of Japan. And these are some of the images that he has created. This was at Los Angeles in 2001. And you see there was an exhibition at the Fondation Cartier in Paris, 2002. And so these are some of the images of the exhibition, and also the Geisai that he has started in 2001. He has organized in Japan and also Taiwan and in the United States. I think he has continued up to 2014, and now he has stopped. And now he has galleries. This is the view of his galleries in a very nice diplomatic residential area near Roppongi in Tokyo. But at the same time, he has other galleries in Nakano, where a kind of hot place for manga and anime, subculture geeks. So now the collecting. This is Takashi Murakami with some of his collections in his warehouse. You see, it is actually a huge warehouse, and we are only in the part of it, and you are seeing only some of the works that he has collected. So these are the exhibition views. The exhibition was structured by 5 rows, different spaces in the museum. This view is, I put the name as a sculpture garden. And this one is Japan, utility, beauty. And there was also study room and factory. And this one is the world inside Takashi Murakami's brain. And 1950 to 2015, this one is actually, I can only show some of it, but the majority of the works are the contemporary artworks. So let's start from the beginning. The number of works that Takashi Murakami has collected at the time of the exhibition in 2016 was about 5,000, but this excludes completely not the image. Okay. But the 5,000 number that excludes a large number of manga and anime-related items and many small contemporary ceramic pieces. So that was the number mentioned for 2016. So that means he continues collecting. So he has much more works now. And of that number for this exhibition, approximately 1,100 pieces were displayed in the show. And in addition to works of contemporary art from Japan and abroad, the collection contains a broad variety of items, including European antique furniture and folk materials. But as I said, the main pillars of the collection are contemporary art, and the Japanese and Asian antiques, and Japanese antiquities, pottery, and crafts from contemporary life, and items associated with Kitaoji no Sanji. I don't know if you heard about the name of this person. He is a noted artist and epicure during the early to mid-Showa period of Japan. Rosanji was a man of many talents. He was also a calligrapher, ceramist, engraver, painter, lacquer artist, and restorator. He has set up restaurants. Murakami once recalled his first purchase was a transfer printed soba cup that he found for 500 yen. That means only a couple of euros in a roadside basket in Kyoto's antique district 25 years earlier. That was probably in the late 1980s. At around the same time, he also bought a print by Horst Janssen. This is what you are seeing now. And next to Horst Janssen's piece, sorry. Excuse me. It's okay, you came later, so no worry. Okay. This is quite interesting juxtaposition of Horst Janssen's one of the very first one he has bought, and then also his self-portrait drawings. And then also he bought one of the very early one was a photograph by Nobuyoshi Araki of his cat Chiro. Unfortunately, we couldn't find that cat Chiro's images, so I am showing the photos that he has also. So so this is it. Although Murakami was a student then, it was the height of the bubble economy, so he was apparently not completely short of funds. Well, although he was purchasing by down payment in every month, he was paying little by little, but he was still purchasing like this, and so this like once time to time like this. But he began seriously collecting only in the past 10 years or so, and the trigger was really this one. And well, it's teacup. And of course, the increase in his purchasing power as his own works began to fetch higher prices must have been a factor. But also, another important factor likely stems from his interaction with the major collectors who bought his works, like top collectors like François Pinault and Eli Broad, and etc., etc. So, in addition to wanting to understand the psychology of people who pay multi-million-dollar prices, Murakami seems to have been driven by the question: isn't the alchemy of conducting transaction with those top collectors who have sufficient influence to control the movement of the art world and who understand the extreme prices from experience art itself? And he expanded his collecting activities from contemporary art into older works and antiques. So, as I said, this was the trigger that set Murakami off down the road of serious collecting. This seems like a normal teacup, but this is really expensive, valuable teacup, which is called Shinoyobi Tsugi Chawa. And that he spotted in a women's magazine. Actually, he was at the lounge, airport lounge in New York, and he was just sort of watching some of the women's magazines, which sounded a little bit strange. But yeah, he was looking around that, and then he saw this picture. Then it was love at first sight, and he bought it immediately. And as I said, I cannot say the price, but it was really, really expensive. And having made such an expensive purchase, he felt that he had to make sure he got full value of it, and ended up catching the collecting bug. So this is really the beginning. Then he got to know a famous antique shop called Sakata Antique, and discovered pieces that at first appeared like garbage. He calls it garbage, but of course it has value, it's some value. It shocked him the way Jeff Koons' works did when he first saw them. This was his encounter with something that goes beyond being simply good or bad, representing a challenge to the concept of antiquity, its deconstruction and the birth of a new concept that we don't yet understand. So as you see, this is presented inside between, but it's actually it's a torsion. It's a used torsion, but there are Sakata antique shops which are putting values on it. And after buying items from Sakata and his followers' shops, he went down the collecting path to antiques, bric-a-brac, and things that seems like a garbage, opening his eyes to aspects of Superflat Japan that were different from anime or manga. In the process, he came across the genre of pottery and crafts from contemporary life, which shifted his interest to living artists. He came to appreciate that at the core of this genre was a deviation from the upmarket department store ceramics of the economic bubble period. If you know a little bit about Japan in the 1970s and 80s, there were like galleries in the department stores, and that they were very active galleries selling not only the ceramics but also the artworks. And in this way, what started off as buying for the purpose of savoring new flavors and then trying things out in his own restaurant for his pieces at his studio and his galleries, at some point became more of an addiction. And what is interesting is not just the phenomenal pace at which he purchased a large number of items, but the fact that the method of purchase are so diverse, as if Murakami is buying in order to try each of them out himself. For instance, he may buy works on impulse at art fairs or sit in an auction room with a paddle and bid directly for something he has wanted for a long time. Or, if he spots something on Instagram during a meal with company, he may simply buy it without much research. For antiques, however, rather than relying on his own aesthetic eyes to select purchase, he buys items that have already been vetted by the discerning eyes of the owners of antique shops. Murakami himself explains this approach as his attempt to study how these antique dealers assess value, how they bargain with their clients, and in what sort of context Japanese people sense beauty, among others. So these are just some of the contemporary pottery and works. Nostalgia, pushing limit, and respect for those who have gone before. Just for your information, this is a work of Fukujiro Murakami, who is actually his father. And I didn't know that his father is making things like this. And while installing the exhibitions, very late at night, because the installation was very delayed and he doesn't finish it, and we all are very tired, and we are so all stressed out. And he came like, enjoyable like this, and with this butterfly, and saying that, Akiko, what do you think? Well, where to put this one? And I asked, well, are you adding another wax? And whose work is it? And then he said, it's my dad's. So it was quite nice, really, the finishing the installation. So the diversity of Murakami's purchasing method is reflected directly in the content of the collection. And not only is it a broad assemblage that transcends traditional genres, it also includes items regardless of whether the artist is well known or not, and regardless of their market value, alongside exquisite items of a quality sufficient to be classified as important cultural properties and so rare. There are items like a papier-mâché tiger brought for 700 yen, which is about €5, or like this object of his father's. Yet, for Murakami, they are equivalent in value. He is not fixated on particular brands or things considered to be of good taste. Nevertheless, examining Murakami's collection does reveal a number of characteristics, including the relatively large number of sculptures of human figures and of items that are round or have a strange forms. Sculptures frequently use scrap materials, and in contrast to the colorful nature of Murakami's own works, a relatively large number of grays or browns as their predominant colors. Among ceramics, there seems to be more items with greenish tint as well as ones that originate in the Ryukyu or other southern highland, or items that are simple and solid. There are also many items with infantile qualities or that convey a feel of nonsense. Well, some of the ceramic ones mentioning. Typically, contemporary artists' collection include works obtained through trade with other artists. And in Murakami's case, such works include those by artists who are represented by the same galleries as himself, and works by friends such as qu'elle and Damien Hirst. In addition, there are works by artists Murakami shows in his own Kaikai Kiki gallery and works that are associated with the Superflat trilogy. You saw some of the images of this exhibition, a series of exhibitions that Murakami curated between 2000 and 2005. Although these only make up a small part of the overall collection, and when you are further examining major directions in Murakami's collection, the grouping that emerges first is defined by what Murakami calls nostalgia. Contemporary artworks that relate to the roots of the artist's own career and to remind us of his youth. So this is one of these works. These are the works by Shiro Otake, another Japanese artist, who provided the momentum for Murakami to enter the world of contemporary art. As you may know, Murakami had originally studied Japanese traditional paintings, but decided to become a contemporary artist after seeing Otake's exhibition at the Saracho exhibit space in Tokyo. Saracho exhibit space in Tokyo was a very first alternative space, and that existed around the 1990s, and that was very influential for many young artists at that time. And other examples include photographs of Doug and Mike Stern, who were a star-like presence for the young Murakami. Some of these photographic works are rarely seen in the art market now, but they were an irreplaceable part of the artist's use. Works by Hosu Janssen encountered when Murakami was studying to get into art university reminded him of the importance of self-portrait. Again, like Hosu Janssen, they represent the roots of his, Hosu Janssen reminded him of the importance of self-portrait. They represent the roots of his experience of art. There are other works, well, I'm showing particularly French artist works, which is a little bit surprising. The Masks by Jean-Luc Moulin that remind Murakami of a piece that he once started but never finished. So there are, there are many like this. So there are also examples of new paintings or neo-expressionist painting, a genre that became all the rage worldwide at the time when Murakami was still a student. So this is the work of Joan Nelson. I believe most of you don't know much about this artist paintings, but Joan Nelson was an artist introduced by Bijutsu Techo, which is a major art magazine, and that time it has been introduced as representing a new trend just before Murakami's own debut, and apparently her work reminds him of the atmosphere of the art world at that key period in his career. That means it was a quiet interval after the stormy replacement of new painting, neo-expressionist painting by simulationism. So he has actually several of these Joan Nelson's works, which has been made in the 1990s. So Murakami thus actively searches for and purchased works that were seminal for his own art history. So now, the next grouping is one that I perceive of as pushing the envelope. The Shino-Jawa mentioned before falls into this category, but the clearest example is probably Anselm Kiefer's gigantic sculptures, which are extraordinary in terms of size, weight, price, shipping costs, and storage space requirement. And Incidentally, Murakami's first trip abroad while he was a student was to New York for the purpose of seeing a Kifa exhibition. So now he is able to purchase it for his collection. So another Kifa works. In terms of size, the monster-like sculptures, yeah, this is also Chinese artist Zhang Fan. This monster-like sculpture by Zhang Fan exhibited together with Kifa's work stands apart from the rest. But there are also a few sculptures like one by Max Friesinger that exceed the weight limit of the galleries in the museum and could only be accommodated near the entrance. So actually I was hoping to present this piece in the gallery space, but it was too heavy. It doesn't look like this, so, but it's actually, if I remember correctly, it's entire piano which has been separated into the part. So, Kifa's sculpture is associated with themes such as war, ruins, the German identity and history, and throughout the collections are indications of Murakami's interest in the trauma of wartime defeat as expressed by artists from Germany, which shares with Japan the experience of defeat in World War II, as well as interest in art that is somewhat distanced from the America Center's mainstream. Murakami's concern regarding the art of countries that have experienced war and natural disasters can also be seen in the work of young Japanese artists, such as Nero Koizumi's video works about a kamikaze pilot that you are seeing now, portrait of a young samurai. And in pointing at the Fukuichi lifetime by finger-pointing worker, as expressed through the agency of the artist Kota Takeuchi, which directly addressed the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident. It is perhaps also possible to see Murakami's interest in the figurative paintings in the style of Chinese socialist realism by artists such as Liu Song and Yuan Yuan from different angles, such as their relation to the paradox inherent to ideological art or their complex relationship with American empire. Strangely, he has many of these works from Chinese artists. It does look like very old, but actually there are younger artists and the works in the recent years. Another topic, a rupture in history is also clearly apparent in the works of Albanian artist Henri Sala. Rather than appealing to Murakami's personal taste, Sala's work seems to attract him simply because the artist has a talent that is very different from Murakami's own. The same applies to Mark Rothschild, whom Murakami describes as a rare artist who can get by simply on the skill of the painting. To the madness to the Soga Shohak, all of which he seems to appreciate because they represent the aforementioned difference in talent or because they represent a state of freedom or action without consciousness that Murakami himself aspires to attain. All these are Mark Rothschild's pieces, and then also the Soga Shohak, the traditional painting. And the collection also includes many items that are held as a mark of respect to genius and greats who shaped the period in which they lived. This interest is best represented by Gian Picocci's photograph of Larry Garassian, Charles Sachs, and Leo Castelli, relaxing. All three are individuals who played major roles in constructing the contemporary art market from the 1970s to the 1990s. I guess you know all of these, the line Naoshima from the Naoshima Gallery, and Charles Saatchi of the Saatchi Gallery, and yes, Castelli, legendary the gallerist, and also the portrait of Steve Jobs while he was in France. Drawings by Andy Warhol and presumably Jeff Koons can also be construed as fitting this context. Another significant factor is whether or not the item provides Murakami with a story that inspires creativity, and in many cases it is a surprising aspect of a work that triggers his interest. So these are some of Andy Warhol's works, and this is probably Jeff Koons, as you know some of the Jeff Koons works. It can easily understand that there's no sign, so we don't know if it is Jeff Koons or not. And yes, so this one is one of the example. It is a letter written personally by Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Toyotomi Hideyoshi is the great unifier of the 16th century Japan. And this letter is about administrative matters such as the procurement of military supplies. And so he was surprised that Hideyoshi, he must be very busy for nation building, is writing a letter personally, things like this. So he finds consolation in the letter at the times when Murakami is so busy that he feels like giving it all up. So, compared to Hideyoshi, his business is nothing. So, yeah, there are, some works like this he has really attracted for that reason. On the other hand, with works by Ryu Fan and Yoshitomo Nara, Murakami seems to relate to the perspective of these artists, both of whom began from similar circumstances as his own, as unknown artists in Japan, but also went on to make names for themselves internationally, in addition to having genuine respect for their art. And Nara's works may not directly address the topic of war, but they do have a feel of a secret hideout and can readily evoke rebellion and resistance. Murakami had wanted Nara's Light My Fire, yeah, this is the centerpiece in the photos. This Light My Fire work, ever since he first saw it, he claims that there is something uniquely addictive about Nara's art, and he ended up buying this work at an auction in 2008 in New York with total disregard for its price. Of course, it was quite expensive, but incidentally, at the same auction, Murakami's own My Lonesome Cowboy set a new price record for his work at the same time. But since he has started serious collecting rather recently, a large proportion of the collection were created by younger artists in the 2000s, the years 2000 or later. These are some of the works that he has collected. And Murakami buys these works of young artists not only as a means to survey the trends in contemporary art, but also to acquire the youth, energy, dreams, aspirations, ambitions, and the freedom that the work of young artists exclude. He explains that when you buy works by artists who are still working, you are buying living moments. It's a way of bringing the artist's concept, their passion, and their use into your own home. It has real value as life-size art. Now, Murakami has also collected a good number of works associated with the outside art context. These begin with a work by the best-known artists in the genre, Henry Darger, and include works by activist and nun curator Kent, who produced her works while leading workshops for young people as well as conveying social message in the 1970s in Los Angeles. There are also finely detailed drawings by young self-taught Taisei Yoshimura and graffiti works. Each of these demonstrate Murakami's clear interest in art from outside the mainstream. This does look like a photography, especially this one and this one. It looks like photography, but it's actually the pencil drawings. And he produces painstakingly drawing by pencil. Another fundamental interest noticeable throughout the collection is the question of shifting values of object and the ever-transforming concept of beauty. Examples include Mauricio Catalan's silk that has been robbed of its content. You may have seen the similar works because it has been shown at the Palais Tokyo while I was working there. These are some of the Terry Richardson's photographs focusing on trivial messages found in the street. In fact, he has many of these Terry Richardson's works. And also Kim Gordon's painting inscribed with just the name of the rock one. And this was actually a tablecloth from one of Murakami's opening receptions, but completed as a works of art with food and drink stains mounted as a painting by Rina's Holdings. Murakami seems to have a keen interest in questions such as what constitutes the value of art, whether something is art or a joke, and whether an artist is a revolutionary or a fraud. So this is also in his collection, Mika Rothenberg's installation about the pearl factory. You may have seen it at the Venice Biennale a couple of years ago. And another example is also Walid Beheshti's use of the distribution network itself in the form of transportation of objects by FedEx as a work of art can be seen as questioning the concept of beauty in our contemporary world. So these questions are connected to the transformation of context, new values, and the creation of concept that can be observed in the perspective that she's rag in torsion, what Murakami calls garbage, as symbolic of beauty in our saturated consumer society, and in Marcel Duchamp's calling a urinal a fountain. It is only natural that Murakami has turned his gaze also towards gifted reformers of aesthetic eyes, such as Senno Rikyu of the 16th century and others, who left a significant footprint on aesthetic history in Japan. Rikyu is known for rejecting existing values that were based on the authority of items to instead create his own tea intentions, and the space for tea, developing the overall art of enjoying each tea session as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and establishing the wabi style tea aesthetic based on plainness and simplicity. Murakami collected tea utensils in part to explore his own Japaneseness by studying the value standard and branding of Japanese aesthetics. Yet another factor is his interest in Senno-rikyu as someone who had close relationships with the art, economics, and politics as an aesthetic revolutionary and a producer, which enabled him to influence the current of money, values, and history. So the collection also includes some Mingei crafts that suggest Murakami's interest in another reformer of the Japanese eyes for aesthetics, Muneyoshi Yanagi. I believe there will be a discussion later on about Mingei. The founder of the Mingei revival movement of folk art in the 1920s and 30s. However, rather than Yanagi, who was an elite member of the upper class with a basic stance of looking down on people, Murakami professed to be drawn more to Kitaoji Rosanjin, who by contrast was not born to the upper class and was a producer who pioneered his own new concept of beauty. So Murakami feels an affinity with Rosanjin's character of continually creating while nursing an explosive temper and fending off criticism that his works were imitational. In fact, Murakami goes so far as to call Rosanjin the teacher of my heart. So looking at the works made by Rosanjin, he sensed the true accomplishments of art in flaws such as the sloppy, pedestrian aspect of a piece, the banality, lack of depth, and flashness. And Komainu guardian dog figures that you see now, and other ceramics associated with Rosanjin now make up one of the significant cores of the Murakami's collection. Now, when an artist collects, many artists are collecting works and different items, as you may know. You may have that Rembrandt collected a variety of objects, including exotic shells, corals, and musical instruments. Andy Warhol acquired a large amount of folk art and Art Deco furniture, and many other artists from East and West throughout the time have collected a diversity of objects. French artists, Edgar Degas and Claude Monet, learned the aestheticism of flatness from the Japanese woodblock prints they collected, and through his collection of African masks and sculptures, Picasso discovered the simplified forms that differed from Western forms. That I see the very good explanation at the exhibition at this moment of the Cubism at the Pompidou Center. So in this sense, artists' collections are more than just the reflections of their personal obsessions, and they are interesting for the glimpse they give us of the research and the sources of inspiration that lie behind their artists' creative works. Many Japanese artists, such as Tadanori Yoko or Shindo Takeu, saw the works, and Hiroshi Sugimoto, who is showing his works at the Versailles Palace at this moment, they have many collections of different objects, appropriate elements from their own collections, or may experiment with them as their materials based on their individual interest. So artists' collections are also compelling in their relation to the diversification of forms, a means of expression, and artist activities. I don't know if you had the chance, I created a show at the Bread Tokyo in 2014 with a collection of Sugimoto, and that exhibition was really made out of his personal collection. Although he considered as he appropriated those objects into his works, artistic expression, so it's different from Murakami. But that was the good occasion of seeing his variety of works. So concerning how Murakami's own creative practice relates to the works and items that he has collected, some relationship can, of course, be seen in his recent interest in traditional motifs and iconography, as apparent in his Dharma paintings and Enso series. This is one of the Dharma paintings and Enso series. In his reference to and quoting of antiquities and his research for the source of Japanese aesthetics. But more than that, by coming into contact with the other artists' creative mechanisms, their way of life, and their philosophies, he seems to intent on grasping their freedom and the diversity of their imagination and applying what he learns to his own creative process. However, his act of collecting encompasses much more than such motivations for gaining inspiration for his own creativity and picking up on current trends. So Oksen, the next grantee master of the Mushano Hoji Senki School, commented that collecting for Murakami is very much like creating, and collection could similarly be called as an enterprise or a project. Certainly, Murakami's collection is of such scale that it exceeds the bound of happenstance, hobby, or simple curiosity. One of the characteristics of his collecting is that he puts as much effort into it as he put into creating his works. If we think about as a project, so what would the objective be? The primary motive for Murakami's collecting activity is not to establish ownerships, nor is it to become a commercial. With the exception of a few items from contemporary lifestyle pottery and crafts that he actually uses from time to time, he does not seem to be particularly interested in just looking at the collected items either. So there was a time when he thought of making a facility like a museum, Los Angeles Sankokan Museum, so that he and other artists in his company could gain more artistic nourishment from easier access to the collection. But today he seems more interested in letting the general public see the items or releasing them to the market so that the works can come alive as a part of history. For Murakami, purchasing art is fundamentally a way of savoring it. He says that there are things that you come to understand better if you can actually touch the work rather than just viewing it. Sharing out the funds to buy a work, touching it directly, enjoying the gamut of emotions that it facilitates, and gaining practical experience of the act of collecting, he is at the same time attempting to learn the true worth of an art dealer by operating his own gallery. So you may know Andy Warhol once wrote, "Buying is much more American than thinking, and I'm as American as they come." And for Murakami's case, impetus by nature, Murakami explains that if something catches his interest even a little, he is likely to try to absorb it by buying it and consuming it on the spot. So now the term superflat naturally recalls the Superflat trilogy of the exhibition that Murakami created in Tokyo, Paris, and New York between 2000 and 2005. As a result of these three exhibitions and associated publications, Superflat became widely understood as a concept that transcends generally recognized as indicating flatness, decorativeness, and playfulness associated with art from Japanese antiquities, all the way down to contemporary anime and manga. As the internet has spread through society, the sense of connections without hierarchy has gained increasing reality, and the term was appropriated for use in other fields such as architecture. However, Murakami has a different take. As a Japanese artist emerging from the negative situation of Japan, a country defeated in a war and had produced its original method of expression, he did not want to be lumped into the category of pop artists who had emerged from the victory country, the United States. Consequently, he began describing himself as a superflat artist. For him, the concept is not limited to the visual or formal sense as described above, nor does it represent a definition of the content of his collection. What is crucial for him is whether after his death all the various activities that he has undertaken will in fact be recognized as superflat. In other words, the issue is the extent to which he has been able to drive forward his experiment in art through the word superflat. And in that sense, it is appropriate to understand it as expressing comprehensively the artist's overall practice or life, transcending period, genre, and existing hierarchies and frameworks in which he has continually tackled the eternal question of what is art from a variety of different angles. It naturally indicates a sense of juxtaposition in which the collection is also liberated from the existing hierarchies, period, and genres in the collections. And while anime and manga was not included in the exhibition, it is possible to discern in it a viewpoint that explores a different aspect of Japan's superflat situation and seeks to understand and organize the trend and essence of Japanese art through a unique approach, while considering them in relation to the world's contemporary art. So Murakami once described his collection as a future tool for discussing Takashi Murakami after his death, referring to it as a scenario for his art as entertainment, or the source of creativity behind his art rebuild. But the collecting activities which absorb large amounts of his time and energy and require so much funding that they sometimes weigh down his business are also crucial for Murakami as he requires leverage and the pressure to push him to the limit in his creative process. One reason that why Murakami wanted to show his collection at this stage might be the desire to organize a collection now that so many works and artifacts have been amassed. But another reason is related to the setback he experienced when he discovered how difficult it was to communicate with young people through Geisai, a kind of open call project that I showed at the very beginning of the talk. He has commented that if even one person with the potential for doing art-related work that bridges Japan and the world sees this exhibition and is inspired by it, it will have been worthwhile. And this demonstrates that even as he is let down and feels dejected, Murakami is changing his approach continually and is putting all his effort into preparing the ground for art that he can believe in. So Murakami's gaze is driven by an unwavering belief that ultimately great works will always manage to emerge into the world. At the other end of the gaze, one can unmistakably sense something like his face in the absolute power of art to appeal to people and move them. So, to conclude, the Superflat Collection project pursues the profound meaning in the seemingly meaningless act of expending large amount of money on things with values that are hard to discern, while seeking the beauty of the pearls hiding in the gaps between the ugly and the decayed nature of humanity. The project may well be the essence of Takashi Murakami's life as he attempts to convey to the future his belief as a creator. Well, thank you very much.
Does anyone have a question to Akiko Miki? First, I would like to thank you to highlight probably a side of Takashi Murakami that few people knows. That collection is really something that explains a lot of what is the artist and beyond the cliché we usually have. And I really thank Akiko, who works years with Murakami on his work and his collection to share this with us. Yeah. So, if anyone has a question, yeah.
I saw a banana playing on a trumpet. Who is the artist of that?
I forgot.
I
forgot that.
The banana.
There's so many. And I was wondering, you may be asking, someone may be asking, so I thought of bringing a big book, the catalog of it. But it was like a stone, it's a so big book that I gave up on bringing. So, I'm sorry, it will come. But as I said, there are at that time, only countable number was 5,000. But I said, it doesn't include anime, manga related object, and also the ceramics and etc. And it was also 5,000. And I have to tell you that when I started preparing this exhibition, so it was not very well organized. As in his storage, it was stacked by different works. In this picture, it looks like very well organized, but in the storage, it was not like that. And then there was no inventory. Well, there is an inventory, but it was not, the well done inventories. So, the dust and so many things. And he also makes film. Now he's a movie maker. So then there was some of the props for the film. So it's a giant, it's a very fake, something which was used for the film. So it was like a cabin Alibaba. And it was like, you had to, even just walking was really good. So the name will come, and I'm sorry, it's just, it just doesn't come. Yeah, so, and also there are many, even though you see it, yeah, but I think the catalog is still available. Again, it's very heavy. It's very heavy, but I think it may be still possible to purchase. You can probably ask to the gallery Emmanuel Carlton, and probably they know if it is still possible to purchase.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, you made your presentation by sections.
Yeah.
Was the section decided busy, or when you were really cleaning the warehouse, and, or do you have already a clear idea of the different?
Well,
was organic, or I wanted to.
Yeah, well, it was not simple like that. Yeah. So, yeah, of course, it was constant communication. I have proposed, okay, Takashi, how about this? This is a section that I think it would be nice to organize. But then he, comes to know, this would be better. And then, if we can continue like this, it's okay. But the problem is that although during the installation period, he constantly changes. So, you know, it's just that there was no list of the works for the exhibition. Usually, you know, I think there are some curators or the people in the gallery. When you set up the exhibition, you have the list of the works of the exhibition. And, you know, well, although there are some minor changes, but still, because otherwise you cannot put the insurance, because some of the works, you know, may have problems. So we have to put those insurance for the exhibited works. However, he continued to be adding and changing. So it was really nightmare. So it was miraculous that musician opened, but we all completely tired, exhausted on the day of the opening, because I think I went back to the hotel around 3 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, I slept at least 2 hours, and the museum director went home pretty much the same time, which is a very fast time. She had to stay very late. And then I came to the museum around 7 o'clock in the morning, and then Ryan was still working. And then the first thing he asked me, where is the shower? I needed to take a shower because he was working all the night. So, but it was. But at the same time, it was amazing working for this exhibition, because his team is really amazing. I mean, he has visions, and when he thinks it is better to do this, and then he tried to change everything. So that means, I mean, he has a chance, and in the end, you know, I kind of understood that he was right. I mean, you know, because institutionally speaking, it's very difficult to manage in accepting all these changes. But sometimes it's just a kind of constant negotiation with the artist, that he is kind of testing that in the institution, the museum, how much you can go, you know, to be flexible as possible. And so in the end, you know, when we accepted listening to his, you know, the request of changing, etc. And of course we said, no, it's not possible to do this at this last moment. But when it is made, I understand that he was right. So, you know, sometimes you have to have this kind of different perspective. So for me as a curator of the exhibition, that was most nourishing, you know, thing that you know, the way kind of tendencies try to organize itself. But at the same time, you have to deconstruct. You have to, sometimes you have to change it. And then maybe it becomes, you know, much more interesting as an exhibition. So the only problem was that was museum setting. So it was very difficult to do this, but if it is in other places more flexible, then I think it would be quite interesting to do this kind of curatorial session, you know. So it would be quite interesting. So I'm sorry, toward the end I had to read a little bit. I wanted to show more pictures, but as I said, there was some copyright issues, so I couldn't get all this. So please excuse me, and I do hope at least it was interesting for you.
Thank you very much. I think we have another discussion at 3 p.m., which is kind of related to this presentation, because it's about Mingen and Wabi-sabi. So two notions that inspire a lot Murakami's as well. So please come again at 3 to extend finally the thought that and the purpose that Akiko exposed